Part 3, Suspension of Law. Chapter 15. Image 17B, untitled, Remains of Drugstore Location Unknown, 1906. Cellulose nitrate negative, 132 by 84 millimeters irregular. They walk, he and William, through streets covered in ash as the wind tugs the smoke around them like a second skin. The pavement opened in front of me, William was saying. He says the weather that morning had been unusually clear, no fog. I should have known something was amiss. Shaking his head, eyes to the ground. I'm a lawyer. It's my job to notice clues. The man nods, though he admits, I can't remember the earthquake. I remember fruit on the ground and waking up in the street, the fire and the pavement cracked like broken glass. He raises his hand to his head and finds a tender spot just behind his left ear, a swollen knot he hadn't noticed before. He rubs the small mass, and when he pulls his hand away, the specks of a new scab are plastered to the pads of his fingertips. It will come back to you, William says. You must have fallen when the shaking began. Hit your head, perhaps. Give it time. They stop in the street to exchange news with others about the collapse of buildings and the makeshift construction of relief camps, the squatters in vacant lots scrawling names and notes on papers and posting them on walls and trees. Drugstore up the road is being pillaged for medical supplies, one man tells them. He clutches spools of gauze and bandages, and his pockets bulge with bottles of pills. Best get in while you can, he says over his shoulder as he moves away. Can't blame them, I suppose, William says. And then, Henry, my brother, he suffers from shortness of breath sometimes, palpitations in his chest. A doctor recommended opiates and bromide salts, which have helped, but I fear for Henry. What he must be feeling now, for what he must be feeling in this, he waves his hand in the air. The man searches for words to ease William's worrisome mind, but his thoughts are interrupted by distant thunder. No, not simply thunder, a physical shaking as someone on the road yells, "Aftershock!" He and William jolt, bumping into each other as they scramble. There are cries and shouts and the clapping of hooves, hundreds of pounds of weight storming through the streets as a stampede of horned cattle tears toward them down Market Street. "Move!" the man shouts as he grabs William's arm and yanks him out of the way. The animals are crazed, slamming against each other and stumbling through piles of debris. They topple wooden beams and crash into buildings, wild and rough, fleeing down the sidewalk and through the street. A woman tries to dive out of the way but falls, and a steer crushes her shoulder. She writhes on the ground as bystanders hurry past, trying to escape into doorways, some jumping for fire escape ladders hanging from the sides of buildings. "What should we do?" the man shouts, but William's mouth is slack-jawed and speechless, his eyes wide. There are gunshots, 1, 2, 3, and the sound of animals wailing. Half a block down, a warehouse collapses onto the thoroughfare, burying most of the herd and crushing them onto the pavement. Falling cornices pierce the longhorns, catching and crippling the cattle, slicing into legs and leathery bellies. More shots are fired as the animals thrash under the debris. Those still running amok bellow and fall, and those trapped under the wreckage are put out of their pain as bystanders load and reload their pistols. In front of them, a steer charges toward a saloon on the opposite side of the street, chasing a white-haired man running for shelter. At the doorway, the gentleman turns, a gun suddenly in his hand, and he shoots. The animal drops to the ground, howling as William and the man dodge through the crowd. A second shot is fired just as they reach the saloon, silencing the animal's cries. Close range. At their feet, the wound drips blood from between the cow's eyes. "There was nothing I could do," the shooter says, when he turns to William and the man. "You saw, there was no time to think. He would have crushed me. He is crying." And the man ushers him into the saloon, out of harm's way. "It is over," the man says, as he waits for the gentleman to stop shaking. "You're okay now." Once the animals have moved on, the men return to the street and find the remnants of a battle scene, bodies, and the metallic stink of blood. Men and women ripped open by the longhorns. Fallen animals, some dead and some not, some crushed under parts of the warehouse, and others slaughtered in the road. They move away, heading south, silent and slow. "Vaqueros," William says, eventually. The cattle must have escaped from their herders after the quake. I don't understand, the man replies, blinking grit from his eyes. The Mexicans drive beef cattle to the city stockyards in the south once the inbound ships are unloaded. They must have fled the docks in the chaos after the quake. They switch back the streets, north and south, down one block and up another, as they stop to help where they can and gather information from others also on foot. It seems that hours pass in this way. A family of 7 drags suitcases through the middle of the road, fleeing to a ferry building at the foot of Market. The mother holds a baby, and the father carries a young girl on his shoulders. The child's legs are bare under her pleated skirt, and her socked feet thump against her father's chest with each step. 3 other children trail behind. We want out, the father says. A second shock will surely hit tonight. Oakland, he tells them. I hear there's help across the bay. The heat intensifies, and the city becomes more deserted as the firestorms rage. The smell of smoldering wood meets them at every turn, but still they walk on. They are told that Marines, the National Guard, the Navy, and Army are moving through San Francisco. Cadets from the University of California. Someone they meet on the sidewalk says Mayor Schmitz has issued a shoot-to-kill order. Chaos, one woman says. Men are being murdered in the streets. They pass a liquor store with shattered bottles leaking from cardboard boxes strewn in the debris. The man eyes the broken glass of the storefront and searches the room behind it. Shelves hanging half-hooked to the walls, and a countertop lies collapsed on the floor. A young man skitters through the store and their eyes meet. Did you hear? He calls to them. The police are confiscating all the alcohol, pouring it in the streets to reduce the risk of mob violence. It'll be streaming through the gutters soon. He takes one last bottle and meets them on the sidewalk. No harm done, he mumbles, and then crosses the road. Earlier that afternoon, they hear news of camps being built in Golden Gate Park and Jefferson Square. Realizing that the square wasn't far, they agreed that would be their destination. At a nearby intersection, they stop to speak with a fireman. Valencia Street shifted to the east, he tells them as he wipes soot from his face and smears the ash with sweat. All the lines snapped, water, gas, electric. The College Hill Reservoir is emptying fast. We'll be out of water before the night ends. And if we're looking for family, William asks, where would be the best place to find information? Golden Gate Park, the fireman says. The city released records there, a master list from the registrar that families can check. We're trying to keep track of those reported as deceased and those who have survived. I've heard there are plans to begin hauling lumber into the park on Friday to build structures in the camp. No telling how long people have to live there. He wishes them luck before rushing toward 18th Street. The square tonight and Golden Gate Park tomorrow then, the man says, determined to help William find his brother. As they walk on, he is reminded of his thirst again, and as he brings his finger to his lips, he thinks of sand.